tell you about my childhood and ruin the first half of my novel.
We will give our people what they want, agreed?
If you want to ask the question, ask it.
When he brought it up, I was shocked.
I feel like we're close here. Most of the time, it looks like you're doing nothing.
Look at you on a stick. Why can't they just leave it alone?
What do women want? Any excuse to get closer.
Welcome to Mad Men, where we're talking about Mad Men, and we're starting with the first season. We're going to talk about the second episode, Ladies' Room. Before we do, my name is Jon Negroni, and he is Will Ashton. Hey, Will.
Hey, John.
And this other guy is Michael Overholtz. Hey, Michael Overholtz.
Hello.
Boys, we did it. We managed to watch the pilot of Mad Men and actually wait at least a few days before watching the second episode. How long did you last, though? I think I was the weakest because I watched it like 2 days later and then rewatched it.
Tough time lasting, huh, John? It's hard to hear.
It's a problem I tend to have, yeah.
So it brings me to, I guess, the question of the episode, John. What do women want?
I've been asking myself that a lot lately. They want me to watch more Mad Men.
I waited an exact week. But that was through, I guess, a force of will. I wish I could have just binged Mad Men again when I watched the pilot. But because we're doing the podcast, I fit it into a rhythm. It's part of like a daily ritual.
It's for the best. It's for the best, because if you blast through it, we would miss so much. Now, Michael just said that you forced him. You said force of will. I don't know what you forced him to do. Maybe spray some deodorant on it. I'm not sure. I wish I had been there to watch it.
Sure.
But what about you?
I did the same thing. I waited a whole calendar week.
You guys just bragging over here. Oh, yeah, I followed the rules. Yeah, I did too.
Well, I wanted it to be fresh on my mind because I was afraid I'd forget some stuff if I didn't watch it earlier today. So
very smart.
I chose to wait a week, and I felt that was more fitting because I this was a weekly program.
That's true.
And people had to wait a whole dang week back in 2007 or whatever to watch this second episode, and so I did the same thing.
Yeah, this episode aired on July 26, 2007. We were actually talking about this off the air, but this episode, they filmed it a year later. They retooled a bunch of things. They cast Bertram Cooper. They kind of figured out some of the roles that were sort of in flux before, which we'll probably talk about. And Matthew Weiner, who wrote the pilot, we were kind of talking about this too. He wrote the screenplay for this episode at least 7 years after he wrote the pilot, which is kind of wild. Did you guys get the sense of that? Like, did you get the feeling that this was like a totally different sort of concoction compared to the first episode? And if so, like in a good way, bad way? Yeah,
it definitely felt like there were, at least I would say, around the copywriters and the mid-level gang surrounding Don, just a lot more depth into those characters, right? They weren't just the gang of Pete Campbell and Don Draper, right? Specifically Paul Kinsey.
Yeah, he's a copywriter now.
Mm-hmm. And you get your first full taste of him. Peggy got a lot of taste of him, but we'll get to that.
More than she wanted, that's for sure. What about you, Will?
I mean, the big thing, and it's not a story thing, it's just in terms of how the actors look. Jon Hamm actually looks more like what I typically associate Jon Hamm looking like in my brain. Not that he looks notably different in this episode, but one thing I noticed in the pilot but didn't really talk about previously was that he looks so much younger in the pilot, and it kind of took me aback, and I was thinking like, oh, maybe he just looks a lot younger in the first season. I just didn't chalk it up because I was just, basically getting to know Jon Hamm for the first time, but then I see him in this second episode. It's like, oh yeah, no, that's Jon Hamm. That's why I associate Jon Hamm. His features a little bit.
I still don't see that. Like, I'm not seeing what you're seeing. He looks the same to me, but maybe there's
something a little bit more. He's a little bit more babyface in the pilot. It's a very small difference, but if you see him in this, he's a little bit, sharper in the facial features. It's very small though.
You know what it was, Will? You know what they gave us a ton of in this episode we didn't get in the pilot? Don Draper chest hair, man.
That is true.
Every second they could, they were like, take your shirt off, do some push-ups.
It's the Legend of Zelda in that little cave there. Yeah. We have some Don in this episode embracing his familial side, because the whole thing with the first episode is that we're not supposed to know that he has a wife and kids until the very end. This episode's a little bit more balanced, right? We got to see like what is Don like, and he's kind of like a cheesy dad a little bit, you know. He's like doing the push-ups like 98, 99. He's doing like dad jokes and stuff. I felt like I was watching, or I was hanging out with Will Ashton, who cracks dad jokes, and he's not even a dad. But yeah, it's an interesting episode. How would you guys, before we kind of like break it down a little bit, how would you think it compares though? Mike, did you like this episode more or less the same?
You know, they're hard. It's hard to compare, right? I think a lot of times pilots, the purpose of each of these episodes were so different. It felt like the pilot was giving us the tone of the show, but it felt like we were getting to the meat and potatoes of what's happening right now. What is going to be happening this season? Who is Don Draper? I felt a lot more immersed into the world. It could be just because I was, more used to it, but it felt like it was actually going somewhere instead of just being nothing but setups.
Yeah, that's pretty fair. All right. What about you, Will?
I think my opinion on this episode is pretty close to the first one. I think the first one, you can just tell that Matthew Weiner had that script for how many years. And like, it just, everything about it is so precise, and just like, you can tell that he just really took over every single detail. And this is a really sharp script as well, but just, you can just tell you can see the attention to detail really is in that first episode a lot. And this one, the script is very good, like I said, but it just felt like it didn't have quite that same like years devoted to writing it quality. Yeah.
It's like the pilot's a well-oiled machine, and it's kind of fitting because the pilot has like a couple of pitches. It has like clients and a lot of ad stuff. In this episode, we don't really have any of that. We sort of have like the creative underworkings, and it kind of matches that second episode feeling that I guess you're talking about too, Mike, where we're kind of like starting to get into the actual, what is this show? It's not just pitches. It's not just like speeches about happiness. It's kind of like exploring a little bit more of, what do the characters want? What are they not failing to get? What's in their way? A lot of stuff like that. I also appreciate how the beginning of this episode, which I guess we can talk about, feels almost like a little bit of like a short story almost, like the way that it sort of begins and, rises with Betty and then sort of ends with her, kind of just like spelling out the theme of the show, or like the big question that the show hangs every season, which is who's inside there. Like Betty's deepest frustration with Don, which we didn't see in the first episode, is that she does not know her husband, and it's kind of messed up. It to this day, like every time I watch this episode, I'm like, it's so bewildering how much information he keeps from her, and she just sort of has to put up with it, like she doesn't have a choice. And also, this episode is interesting because we're really following 3 viewpoints of 3 different women, and there's a lot of like work going on here with each of these women and how they're sort of like dealing with, basic misogyny in the 60s and all of that. We're obviously getting lots of setup that we won't give away too much, but I want to put a note in this episode that we would have to maybe like talk more about in a future date, which is that I think the way that this episode handles Don's romantic life and why he has affairs, why he's unfaithful, and what he tries to get from women, a lot of the answers are in this episode. So like, I think the whole show takes 7 seasons to really get that like firm and like confirmed and everything, but you can see it just in this episode, which is really impressive. And last thing I'll say is that I think the pilot is stronger because this episode is a little bit more heavy-handed. There's way more overt stuff going on here. It's not quite as like, I don't know, subversive. But I guess that's part of one thing this episode does better though is it has way fewer, like, it's the 60s. Did you notice that it's the 60s? By the way, it's the 60s. There's like 2 big things, and they involve Betty, so I guess that's one thing. But okay, I guess we can break this whole thing down, huh? What were you gonna say, Mike?
Oh no, I was just gonna make but they still also had the obligatory gay man acting straight too hard scenes.
Oh yeah, they had one more of those. I think it's better when he does look like really trying to look like he's checking Peggy out at that one.
I was gonna fade that up.
You can tell he's practiced. Well, what a great performance of like.
I did have a question about that, and I wasn't sure if we were going to talk about this or not, but I was curious, is that because that's a POV shot, so we're seeing it from Peggy's point of view. Is that actually the look that he's giving, or is that just a perception that Peggy has of him?
I think that's the look that he's giving, isn't it?
I just felt like
it doesn't really work otherwise.
I don't know, because it just didn't seem like his usual demeanor. Like it seemed more like I don't know. I just took it as like that's how Peggy saw it. Like
You've
not
only
that
had one episode to get to know him, Will, and you're already trying to figure him out. What did men
granted,
want?
I have seen
Will's
the
is-
first season. I have seen the first. It's been a long time since that, but I have seen the first season. But that was something that a thought that crossed my mind, so I just wanted to pull the table.
Speaking of drinking a lot, I have it, boys. This week, the Maker's Mark is coming out.
Oh,
We're going to talk about this episode.
Ooh.
now you've
Mike,
done it.
Mike doesn't know, Will. Mike hasn't really seen me put some whiskey back in quite a bit.
Oh boy.
As I say, in quite a bit. I've seen you put some whiskey back, John.
Yeah.
That's good. Yeah.
I'm drinking Pendleton tonight again. I'm on glass 2.
I'm just doing a regular old beer because last time I got a little too into the whiskey myself, so I wanted
Got a little
rein
too
it back a
razzle
bit.
dazzle.
I got a little bit, yeah. I was just like, I want to be a little bit more civil this time. So
I want
you
to be
guys enjoy
like
your whiskey.
I like
wanna
where
be-
you were at last week.
I want to be Don coming home from work. I want
Yeah,
my
you
wife
started-
to be like, started on the train. Nope, at work.
Perfect. No, I'm excited because I haven't had anything to drink in over a month. So
Not even water? John, you have to drink, buddy. We told you
You
this.
gotta be hydrated.
whiskey's just as good as water, isn't it? All right. Ladies' room. Okay, so this episode begins with a scene that I already mentioned earlier. The scene where we see Roger and his John Slattery's real life wife. Let me make sure I get her name right. I know her first name is Talia.
I didn't know
forget
that.
her last name.
A good tidbit.
It's Mrs. Slattery.
Mrs. Slattery. Nope. No, it's Talia something. Talia Balsam, something like that. But yeah, no, they're married in real life, and they're on a little bit of a double date at a restaurant. I think it was called like the Toot Suro or something like that. There's a nice little line of dialogue. There's a lot of like quips that Don is kind of. We notice a lot in this episode that Don tries to deflect questions about himself with like quips and sort of like, oh, chicken before the egg, or oh, it's because you didn't see my good side. He's just like, that's his like defense mechanism. Right?
I don't want to give away the first half of my novel. That was a pretty good one.
That was
a
a pretty
good
good
line.
one. I feel like I've said that before, which that's how pretentious I've been before.
But John, you've written a novel. You can't use it anymore.
That's true. Not like an American novel, not like a novel about my life, right?
Is that not about your life? Oh man, I read that so wrong.
For those of you who don't know, it's a sci-fi fantasy novel. So, but anyway, this scene is interesting because you can kind of tell the early goings of what clearly seems to be Betty's depression. She's sort of struggling to get Don to talk about himself. She's feeling like she's trying to talk. She's trying to kind of just have like a conversation with these people, but you can sort of tell that she doesn't fit in. What was your read? Because I think this is our first introduction to Betty. So we can start with you, Mike. What was your take on this whole get down, this dinner? Super uncomfortable.
Yeah, this dinner with Drawn. I don't know. I was trying to make a dinner with Andre joke. It didn't exactly work.
Good effort.
I wasn't getting a lot of Betty, right? You're at the table, and I think, like the Times, the show kind of draws you into to what Don is saying. But once Betty got to the bathroom, I loved the quick line of, you ever have that when your hands go numb? And of
No.
course she's like, no. Yeah.
Yeah, she's not even like concerned. She's just sort of like, also that whole, it's called the ladies' room. There's a lot in this episode about mirrors in general, and sort of like reflections of each people. I kind of want to put a pin in that because it's relevant in this scene, but then it's going to come up later. But what about you, Will? What do you think of Betty in this scene? What do you think of this scene? Did you love it?
Well, I wanted to make a correction. Betty is in the pilot. So we do meet her.
We barely. This is where we really get an introduction to her character, though, right?
Okay, I didn't know what you meant exactly. If that's what you were referring to, proper, or if it's the first time we see January Jones, because we do get to see a couple actors for the first time in this episode. So I just want to make sure.
Yeah, like Bertram Cooper, and then a few people. But this is like where she actually has some lines of dialogue. She has a story, a subplot. Yeah.
Well, she has lines in the pilot too, but I get what you mean. It's a really good scene.
Coming at me full blast. You see this, Mike?
Sure.
Every week.
But I really, going back to the mirror thing real quick, I just want to say I really admire the cinematography for all the mirror shots. Those are very hard to get right. And I know that Phil Abraham was also the DP again for this episode. He shot the previous one. This was just like before I think he was getting into direction himself, or like just around that time. Like he was between being a DP and a director. I think he actually directs a couple episodes of Mad Men later down the road. But just that solid, good work. I was trying to remember if he shot a particular episode in Sopranos that was very mirror heavy as well, because I was trying to think about that. But we're not talking about Sopranos. We're talking about Mad Men, baby.
Yeah, we're talking about Mad Men as men. Yeah, I think the visuals in this episode, I think, tend to stick out more for me than the dialogue. Some of the dialogue is just really like, okay. Like, there's one part where Roger's wife literally says, like, don't smile, it'll make it harder. It's like, okay, I wonder what you're trying to say there. But it's still nice. So Betty, she's a little sick from her food. She had I think it was like lobster with like her vodka gimlets. Also interesting, the idea of like the old fashioned and the gimlet, like new versus old. There's a lot of that stuff going on in this episode too. And it's something that I think the show does better later, that sort of contrast, I think. Because in this episode, it's like you literally have Ken Cosgrove being like the modern man, he listens to the radio, he gets his news from the radio, not the paper. And then literally in this same episode, I think it's Paul. Is it Paul? Somebody who's basically saying that like radio is like an aging whore or something like that.
Dying whore.
Dying whore? Was that what it was?
I'm almost positive.
Yeah, no, Betty's saying to Don in the car ride home, she's like, she liked seeing Don the way other people see him. And it's like this desperation. It's like this feeling she has that like she does not know this man. And she's like flailing because they've been together for at least 8-9 years now, because Sally is around that age. And yeah, I think that this is like really good early stuff for Betty in general. But yeah, so Don also has this line of dialogue where he says, because Betty's trying to get him to talk about his childhood, right? And she's literally like, well, like what were you like a kid? Can we thank your parents for all of this, whatever? And he basically says that talking about your childhood is the same thing as talking about politics, religion, and sex. And that always sticks out to me a lot, because like it's kind of like the hands go numb thing. He just sort of like accepts like, oh, what, that's something that people believe, right? And I think in this episode for the first time I was like, it's kind of like maybe that's why they chose People Are Funny as the show that gets like mentioned a couple times here, because that to me just came off as like the show trying to have like a sense of humor, but not really being. I think Mad Men gets much funnier and sharper than this. I guess that's my point.
No, I think there are a couple of funny moments in this pilot, or it's not pilot, second episode. One in particular I really enjoy, without giving too much away, is when who's the actor? Who's the character we were talking about earlier?
We were talking about a bunch of characters.
I know.
Sal.
The closeted gay man.
Sal.
I got it right.
I didn't want to designate it solely to that, but I felt bad because that's the main thing I know about him at this point. Sal comes in, and Don had already called in sick. And he's talking to Peggy, and he's just like, "Where's Don?" He's like, "Oh, he's calling in sick." He's just like, "I was never here." He just instantly talks.
Yeah,
good bit.
I'm leaving. Don't tell anyone I was here. Yeah, very. And there is that part where like Paul is just like, "Haven't you ever worked in an office before?" It's like, if he's not here, that means you can go to lunch. Very true. Very true. But all right.
All the deodorant pitch stuff as well. Like they're selling it like a spaceship, and acting like deodorant is this like sci-fi concept was pretty good comedy stuff, I think.
Well, that's the more subtle stuff I think is kind of nice, because it's good writing for Paul, right? Because we get to know him more as like he's a Twilight Zone guy, and it kind of comes full circle that he thinks that would be a good ad, and that this is good setup, because that is like Paul's like deep desire is to be like a creative person, but he can't get that out of him through this job. And even he has that line. He's like, "I still have my novel." Man, there's a little bit of stuff going on with Joan and Paul here, where like in the first episode, I don't think we really mentioned it, but like they kind of hint that she and Paul had like a thing, right? And I guess in this episode, you see a little bit more like as soon as like Paul says anything to Peggy, Joan kind of like swoops in. And it's weird because there's other stuff that's going to happen this season that really makes me wonder why. Like, was there just sort of like a failed like love triangle thing that they wanted to do that they just got rid of, or is that just me? I don't know.
I didn't read it specifically as Paul. If I'm just looking at these first two episodes, and I guess your read on this is going to be more accurate as you've seen less of Joan. But it just makes I feel like the whole thing about Joan is that she has had a thing with everyone. The doctor she recommended to Peggy. She knows all the guys in the office. It's just that's just kind of to me that's who Joan is. She's going to swoop in. She's going to flirt with everybody.
I don't know if I'd go that far, but she's certainly someone who is, of all the characters, the most aware of her sexuality, most aware of her innate charisma. And I think she kind of uses that in different ways. Like, I mean, certainly, like, even if it's just in a flirtatious way, like, she can use that to her advantage. I don't know if she's necessarily had a thing or a fling with everybody and anyone in the office, but certainly I think she's, like, kind of like established herself through her sexuality. Not that it's only her sexuality, but certainly that's a great asset for her in this workplace.
Yeah, I'm gonna hold my tongue because there are certain things about Joan that I think they grow her with the show in terms of like what she really wants. I just don't see as much in these early episodes, which is kind of throwing me off because I guess what I'm saying is like this is not the Joan that I think the show really lands with. Even in this first season, I think we get more of like what her motivations are later.
Do you think that's a limit on Weiner's part?
I don't even think it's a limitation. I think it's just sort of like a false start. It's just sort of like, here's where the character started. And I think they found something better along the way, which is great. Like that's way better than the alternative where, they just kind of stuck with what might not have been as good or might not have. Because I think in these early episodes, she just comes off as slightly one-dimensional to me. And where I think we get to know her, it gets much deeper and there's like way more, there's a better explanation for why she is the way she is, but we'll have to talk about that later, I guess.
I would say, isn't that just the way it works, though, right? It feels like he has such a vision for specifically Dawn and Peggy, and it kind of feels like halfway through the show they just start writing their own plots, like their characters just take them naturally where they need to go, and that's kind of when you start to get the Joan that the show lands with, right? It's kind of like he's like, I figured these two out. Let's move about the office and figure out. Same thing with John Slattery, right? I don't think his character is super fledged out right now, and you're going to get a lot more of him as the show goes on. It's just
right. For now, he's just like a trickster. He's just the lovable scamp, the guy with the best dialogue.
Also, same with the Colonel Sanders man. I don't know his name yet, but he looks a lot like Colonel Sanders. Cooper. Okay.
Ah, he's one of the best characters.
I'm not saying he's a bad character. I'm saying watching or rather rewatching this pilot, all I really know or remember about him is that he looks a lot like Colonel Sanders.
So far, you've made fun of Sal. You made fun of Cooper. Who's next on Will's hit list?
What did I make fun of Sal for?
I don't know. It's not like
I just didn't remember his name. That's not me making fun of him.
It's like, is that Peggy's perspective that he's bad at checking?
No, that was a genuine question. I don't know what this accusation. I think Sal is probably my favorite character so far, if I'm going to be honest.
So, you're going to say, Mike?
Oh no, I was just going to break your balls. You can go on.
Good.
I would encourage it, Mike. Go ahead, bust his balls a little bit.
I think what he was going to go after me on that one. So then Peggy goes in the bathroom with Joan, and that scene that I was kind of alluding to before, where they're playing with like the reflections, where you see the reflection of one woman, but then you see Peggy, like the real person. I love that shot because it's like you just get the sense that like Peggy, who's kind of caring and who's kind of like, hey, you're all right. And this woman, and we just see her reflection, and she's just like crying. And I think like one of the themes of this episode is that Peggy just views herself as like in a totally just different headspace, a different dimension than a lot of these other characters in The Office. And one thing that I really appreciate about this episode too, that I think the pilot kind of starts but doesn't really like set, is that really like Peggy has so much in common with Don. It's something that like is just going to keep getting better and better as the season goes. But I remember when I was first watching this show and I was having discussions with people about it, and they're like, I wish we got more of like what Don's life was in the 50s at Sterling Cooper. How did he become the creative director? And like, we don't need flashbacks for that sort of thing because we have Peggy's story in terms of like, what is it like her first day at Sterling Cooper, and she's trying to like be her own person.
Careful, John. You're going to give some AMZ executive an idea for a prequel series, and that's going to get greenlit for 2024.
Oh, they've probably wanted to do a Don Draper prequel with who would we cast? Bran Stark from Game of Thrones. I don't know.
Are we casting that young for a young Don? How young is this?
Well, he's now in his 20s. Will, you're right. It's probably going to be one of the Stranger Things kids.
No, what about is it Jacob Elordi or just Jacob Lordy?
Jacob Lordy, who's that? Oh, you're talking about Bran Stark?
You know,
No, he's in Euphoria. He's Nate Jacobs in Euphoria. He's also
I haven't seen
Kissing
Euphoria.
Booth.
yeah, I haven't seen you.
I've seen
I was gonna propose Logan Lerman, my good friend from Perks of Being a Wallflower.
That
as
could
a-
work. He's
Yeah.
right. Well, he's getting a little older, isn't he? Isn't he about to?
But
be
he
like
looks
mid-30s?
young. He has that boyish
You look
face.
young, Will.
Well, thank you.
Welcome. But you're right. Barry Keoghan it is. He could do it. That would be like the chaos version of that for sure. But anyway, so Peggy's still kind of getting the ropes of Sterling Cooper. And another thing that I wanted to note here, I'm not sure if I don't know when it's going to break, but I do appreciate that these early episodes, by the way, never start at Sterling Cooper, or at least so far. They start outside of the office, which is kind of fitting, because I think the show could have easily fallen into the trap where it's a show about advertising executives, which is not what this show is like at all. It's sort of like incidental that it's about advertising, I guess. Mike, why are you sending us pictures? Who's this guy?
That is Jacob Lordy. That's Nate Jacobs. This is
No, that's the guy from Euphoria. Is he also in the kissing booth?
Oh,
yes, he's in both. Yes.
Okay.
This is our Don Draper, circa 25.
Yeah. If for the listeners who don't know, I'm a professional casting agent. So if
Oh,
you
wow.
actually want to be in the movies, you can send me your info.
Well,
See,
now
I thought
I know
you
the
were
reason you haven't helped me out is I don't have talent.
I thought you were referring
Ooh.
to the guy from Super 8 that's in the kissing booth movies. I thought you were talking about two different people, but I don't know that actor's name.
That's Noah Centineo, Will Ashton.
No, that's from To All the Boys I Loved Before. I know some of these things.
Just seeing if you're paying attention.
Joey King plays Don Draper.
No, not Joey
There we
King.
go.
But if they want to do a gender flip Don Draper, I'm there for it.
Well, if we were just going to do that, we would just do a Peggy Olsen show proper. But I feel like
that's
that is what Mad Men is.
Isn't that what AMC wanted? Like after the show ended, they were trying to get a spinoff about Peggy, and Matthew Weiner was just like,
yeah,
nah.
you don't need it. Her
Right.
story ends.
Better call Peggy.
Yeah, better call Peggy.
So this next scene is interesting. So the guys are hanging out in Don's office. Jackets are off. It's a little bit more casual. I think Cooper calls it like there's like a Navy attitude that the guys have here. And there's a new character. I don't remember seeing him in the pilot. I don't know if they even name him in this, but he's yet another kind of like account executive, dark-haired guy. I think he's supposed to be a writer with Paul, though. I could be mistaken. But yeah, so they have the whole thing where they're gonna try to do an ad for Right Guard, like deodorant, and they're trying to like figure out, oh, how does it smell? And there's kind of an uncomfortable scene here where they decide to like make Ken the butt of the joke, and it gets a
Pretend like
little
it's
bit,
prom night. Yeah, it's not great.
you could be the girl. Yeah. Literally, they like take his shirt off and like manhandle him. So
I also thought it was interesting too. It seemed like Don was a lot more not involved, approving the hijinks happening in his office. Like with Pete's bachelor party, right? He was super above it. He's looking to get into upper management. He's the director of creative. You guys are just mid-level guys. But this was like the boys were in Don's office hanging out. He wasn't kicking them out until he had to go have a more important meeting. Well,
so do you think that that's because he is sort of like he doesn't have the pressure of the Lucky Strike pitch weighing on him, or do you think it's something else? Because that was my read of the pilot, was that he was stressed out, and that's why.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think that's a really great read. I think even this shows as Don gets more stressed at work, he gets a little bit more into himself.
More like into Midge, yeah.
Yeah, well, exactly. It's accurate. It's accurate.
I don't know. Will, it looked like you were about to say something super profound.
Yeah, no, my final thought I was going to say was call 21 Pilots because Don Draper is stressed out.
Oh, that's why you decided not to talk.
Yes, you guys are actually having a thoughtful conversation about the show, so I was like, I'll hold my tongue. But John's like, no, go ahead.
Sorry for calling your bluff. The Cooper barges in at the worst possible moment. He says Navy attitude. That's what he says. Navy attitude around this place, and that's Roger's fault. I think they stressed already that Roger was in World War II, and this is Cooper of Sterling Cooper, And, he's obviously like a bit older. He's a bit more of like they call him the guy upstairs at one point, Paul does. And he takes Don aside, and they're still on that Richard Nixon sort of subplot that might be developing later this season. I think it's much better than the last episode in terms of like the historical sort of like attitude around it. I have to say though, so they're having this conversation right outside of Don's office, which is weird, isn't it? Like you'd think that the guys would have left the room and then Don and Roger and Cooper would be in his office.
It is weird, but this has a really, we were talking about the comedy of the show earlier. This has a really funny kind of subtle sight gag where they're talking, you just see this burst of fire. Like they don't address it too much, but it's implied that someone got one of their lighters on the deodorant and just lit up and found out that you can light deodorant on fire. And they don't really call too much attention to it, but I think that's probably the funniest gag in the whole episode.
Yeah, I liked it. What did you think, Betty, psychiatrist?
I think them leaving the office, I think speaks a lot to like Bertram, I don't think it was weird. It read to me, it was like, this guy is about business. Like the quickest thing for them to do right now is to step out of the office. He's going to tell Don, because Don turned down the offer before, right? He didn't want to.
Do you think it's a power move? Do you think it's more of like, we're not going to have this conversation in your office, like you're so important. We're going to do it out here in front of everybody.
I don't know if it's as much of a power move as much of speaking to Bertrand's like ability to just be about business. Like, I don't care about anything else going on. Do what you need to do. Let's just have this quick conversation, then I'm going to leave. I mean, man doesn't even wear shoes in the office. He does what he wants to do. That's weird.
I love that they did that quirk so early on, too.
It's weird for 2022, let alone, 50s, 60s, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but we are in New York,
Someone hasn't seen a certain Sundance movie that I can't talk about too in depth. But John has seen it, I think.
My left foot.
Yeah, sure.
I have to admit, this scene always confuses me. I don't this next like conversation they're having while this stuff is going on in Don's office, where they're sort of being like, like we should try to get, Dick Nixon to, basically get rid of Ted Rogers and work with them. But Don is just kind of like, why are we doing this? He's kind of whining. And I don't really get it. Like he even sort of says like, oh, I don't vote. So it's like, it doesn't have anything to do with politics, I guess.
I didn't realize you were so close to Richard Nixon, calling him Dick Nixon and all.
Well, that's what they call him.
I thought they call him Richard Nixon. Did they call him Dick Nixon?
No, they say Dick Nixon.
Okay, my bad.
Yeah. They did in the first episode. They called him Richard, but I'm kind of curious. Like, why do you think Don is so resistant? I don't remember the rest of this season him being so like fiery about, or just being so like, it's this guy. He wants us. I don't know.
Don's scared of failure. He doesn't want to be put into position to fail. That's why he gets so stressed about the Lucky Strike account. That's why he gets so stressed about figuring out what women want. He feels like he's failing his wife, right? He doesn't, this is a hard situation. He'd rather avoid it than be thrown into it.
But also I feel like it's implied that like Don doesn't even really want to fully understand life and the problems they're in. Like he sees advertising as a sort of mathematical equation that can be solved, and therefore there's some sense to it. I kind of get the sense that like if he can figure out a pitch, he can kind of figure out what life is about. I don't know. Is that me reading too much into him though?
I think it's less about figuring life out, and I think it's more figuring out people. Because I think this whole episode is a bit of I think that he has a worldview. He has a sort of like, this is what I'm supposed to be like striving for. Specifically when it comes to like later when he thinks that like making Betty happy is like getting her a new watch, telling her that, look at our kids, look at our house. Like, I don't know. I think that he's obviously torn and conflicted about this sort of thing. I guess I just struggle to connect that to his fear of a political campaign. Because I think like in theory, like that conceptually makes sense, Mike, that he'd be afraid of failure. But I just wonder, does the episode really stress that a lot? Like, does it really kind of get to the heart of like why that would be a new challenge for him? And then if not, that's okay, because it doesn't have to be explicit.
But I took the politics. Like I said, I'm fairly green to the show, but I took the politics thing as more that he wants to be as undivisive as possible. Like by nature of being an advertisement person, he doesn't want to cause strife, even among his coworkers. So by being apolitical, he's choosing not to really take a stance and kind of appeal to as broad an audience as possible.
I like that read. I just wish that I was seeing the same thing, because that would make a lot of sense, and I think that would be really cool if like that's what they were going for. But I guess I just didn't get that from that scene. But hey, maybe I'm forgetting stuff that happens later in the first season. So I'm gonna hope for the best. All right, so then Cooper walks away in his socks. And I do say we don't get enough of Roger in this episode, but what we get is pretty good. Paul and I think the rest of the guys go out to lunch, but Peggy brings out her sad lunch or whatever. It's like a banana.
I was waiting to talk about this brown banana, which I think.
Yeah, what's that about?
Oh.
I mean, I think even for Peggy, that's a bit extreme. Like, I feel like the sad sandwich makes sense to me. I forget what the other item was, but like nobody would have that decrepit banana, right? Like even Peggy, I feel like.
I mean, she does live in Brooklyn.
That was the prop department scene that there was a banana needed for a lunch. They bought all the supplies and then they shot the scene 3 weeks later. And they're like,
they were like, oh, it's delayed.
Here's the banana.
It is interesting. Like, I don't know if this was intentional, but they even like have at the very beginning of the episode where Roger is just sort of like, oh, my nanny used to make fried chicken and I'd wrap it in wax paper and bring it with me. And his wife is just like, about, okay, he had Belvedere for a nanny. Yeah.
Yes, Cooper and fried chicken. And keep going. I like the
Sterling.
Sorry. Oh, never mind.
You got to stop with the Colonel Sanders joke.
Nah, I say. I want some nice ads for you guys.
I want to before we go down that rabbit hole among rabbit holes. Bertram Cooper is played by Robert Morse, who was in the film. It's his 60s film. He was like a kid in the film How to Succeed in Business Without Really Trying. And so a nice little sort of like nod there and all of that.
Hey, Mad Men, men and women, and everybody else. So sorry to interrupt the show, but unfortunately, Robert Morse, the actor we are about to talk about, actually passed away just days after we recorded this episode in April. So that is why you're about to hear some accidentally incorrect information, and we do apologize for that. So hopefully you'll still enjoy our convo. Again, we're sorry. Okay, back to the show.
But he is still alive, Bertram Cooper, because I looked it up. I wasn't sure. He's getting up in years. He's 90 years old.
He was Santa Claus in Teen Titans.
You were Santa Claus in that dream I had once.
I literally was Santa Claus for a pet photo op at a animal hospital once. So
I know, Mike. I was there.
I've done that before. I pretend to be Santa Claus for like nieces and nephews. Have you ever done that, John?
No.
Well, you're the outliner. It's 2 beats.
You heard it here first, folks. John hates his nieces and nephews.
No, I'm Puerto Rican. Like they take one look at me and they're like, "You're not a white guy from North Pole. You're just a white guy from Puerto Rico."
John, you're not committed enough. You got to really sell it. You got to be.
It's never going to happen. No,
you're an admin. You got to sell it, baby.
It would be part of being an admin is you got to know when to sell, when not to sell. Maybe that's what Dom's getting at with Dick Nixon. But no, when I dress up as characters for my nieces and nephew, I always stay in my lane. I dress up as like Zorro or something. You guys wouldn't understand. I don't have the beard that you got. I mean, Will, you shaved it, but you two got your beards going on. I don't.
Oh yeah, we forgot to mention, I guess, that I had a beard in the previous episode. Not the listeners would know, and now I don't have a beard. So that's
we do have a video recording. So
and now he looks like Dr. Disrespect. Official on the podcast. You do know who he is. I sent you a picture off the air.
I know what he looks like. I still don't know who he is. But
quit lying.
All right, I'm this Navy attitude with you two. It's got to end now. All right, so the second after Peggy's just like, I'm not going to have lunch with you, Paul. Get lost. But she does it diplomatically. Joan kind of comes up and she says what we're all thinking is like, that lunch is making me sad. And she kind of co-ops Peggy into having lunch with the coworkers. Very relatable scene. I don't know if you two have ever been in this situation where you brought your lunch, you just want to be left alone. Maybe this is just me. But a bunch of people are just like, no, we're going to go have lunch and we're going to go be social. And introverted John is just like, okay.
Yeah, that's
Mike, you're introverted.
Oh yeah, I'm super introverted. It is. I wouldn't say being introverted. I remember. So I work for a tech startup, and very on brand. Yeah. They buy us lunch. They buy the whole company lunch when you're in the office, and so you get your lunch delivered. And so
every
it's
day?
just like Yeah, every day they buy us
Oh
lunch.
my gosh.
And but because all the food gets delivered at once, everybody picks up the food, so like it kind of creates this environment where everybody is supposed to eat together. But in my first 2 weeks, that's such an unappealing thing to do. You don't know people. You're not
That's
trying
the
to
point.
meet
You're supposed
everybody
to
at
get to
once.
know. You're supposed to get to know people. You got to like, cloister in, find a little clique that looks interesting.
Sorry, no, thank you. I have a super rotten banana at my desk. I'm trying to scarf
Yeah,
down.
clearly. All right. I don't know. I know, Will, I don't think you've ever worked at a startup, but
No, I have worked once at a cubicle for an internship. But that's probably as close as I can get to this mentality that you're referring to.
Fair enough. All right, so the boys are like, oh, let's take you to lunch. We have plenty more casual misogyny. We get a Pete Campbell mention where he sent them a postcard from Niagara Falls. I do really appreciate how Roger is just sort of like, wow, how uninspired is that, or unimaginative?
Wait, you talking about where he's choosing to go, or the pun that he makes where it's the wettest place on earth? Which one are you referring to?
The pun is just atrocious. Like,
well, it's true. I'm not defending the
that?
pun. I'm asking a question.
You can tell that Pete Campbell is not a writer. He's an account executive. That's for sure. But no, just like when Roger's like making fun of him, because there's a point in the episode where they're doing the Dick Nixon account and they're like, oh, I'm going to warn you. Roger's like, I'm warning you right away. Pete Campbell is going to be the guy on this. And Don is just like, man, I should go to Niagara for like 2 weeks. He'll do wonders for my career. And then Roger is just sort of like, what an unimaginative place to go for your honeymoon. I say that as I've never been in Niagara Falls. It's probably stunning, but I've always found it kind of
I've
odd.
Been on both sides of the Niagara Falls.
What's it like? Is it
nice.
really the wettest place on earth? I don't mean that sexually.
No comment. But I would say that smart. I went to both sides of the Niagara Falls in middle school, first 2 separate trips, and I will say that the American side I think is a little bit more adventurous because you actually get to go underneath the the river proper.
Well, and also if you have to go to like the hospital, you don't have healthcare, so plenty more adventurous.
Yeah, that's true. If someone came barreling down from the Canadian side to the American side, that would be quite a heavy toll to bear. But
I don't think Mike approves my universal healthcare political joke. He's just kind of looking like.
No, I thought barreling down was a very funny term.
Ken Cosgrove puts the moves on Peggy. This is such a funny, like, I know I said this last week, but Ken Cosgrove, what a weirdo in these first couple episodes.
Is that the tall, lanky one?
Yeah, he was the guy I know in the game you never played, Will Ashton, called L.A. Noire. He's the main character in that.
Okay, because he's really not, like, he doesn't have any defining characteristics in the pilot.
It's a performance. Just sort of it so is, and like it's something that I don't think I really caught when I first watched the first season for the first time. Is that this is not really who he is? Like he's acting.
Are you talking the character or the actor?
The character.
Okay.
I would hope that the actor.
Yeah.
I was gonna say. I mean,
they didn't even give him the script.
If you're talking about the actor.
They had to edit the line. He was like, "Hey, Elisabeth, let's get out of here. Go to the zoo."
Yeah, I was gonna say, if you're talking about the actor, I'd be like, "Oh, John, you sweet summer child. You don't realize they're all acting. There is no Don Draper."
This is a documentary, right, guys?
I thought Harry Crane was a lot creepier than Ken Cosgrove. I think there's nothing creepier than a dude who's joining in on the misogyny, but then every chance he gets being like, but I'm married.
I'm married. Yeah.
You see this ring? It's okay. Show me your tits.
Harry Crane. We're gonna get a lot of Harry Crane later. And by the way, so Harry Crane is played by what's this guy's name? I'm gonna look it up real fast.
His name is Guy from The Office. Guy from
The Office. Thank you. That's such a Christian name, of course. I'm not seeing it on this list.
It's Rich.
Here we go. Rich Summer. Every other thing I've ever seen him in, he only, in my opinion, he only ever takes away from other shows that he shows up in. Mad Men is like the one show where I think that the casting is perfect and the character is spot on. But in every other show, like Love, The Office, like you mentioned, Glow, like all these other shows where he shows up, I see this guy and I don't see the character he's playing. I just see Harry Crane. And I think it's Mad Men. I think Mad Men like ruined this guy for me, but I don't know if that is just me.
It is just I literally see him as Pam's friend from art school. Like that's where I saw him. I saw that first
from art school.
Yeah.
He's literally like in like 2 or 3 scenes from The Office.
But he made such a lasting impression on.
He does. He does. He's like, guys, let's. Oh, my ex-girlfriend's over there, and it's just like, really, dude? Like, you're drawing attention to that? Anyway, we'll talk about The Office another time, just you and me and Mike. Okay, so they have like their little lunch. Ken puts some moves on Peggy, and I guess we haven't really talked about it yet, but I mean, Peggy's still kind of hung up on Pete. She's a little bit like, hey, this guy who literally is on his honeymoon. Although that's my question actually for you, Mike. Do you think Peggy really, because later in this episode, she's sort of like, oh yeah, I'm spoken for, kind of, right? Do you think though that she actually is into Pete at this point? Or do you think she's using that as a way to like get Paul to leave her alone?
So there's 3 clues the show gives you, right? So the first one is, oh, he's on his honeymoon, right? It's his first mention of it. You're like, oh, that seems fishy. That seemed like a little bit forced and nonchalant to get information, but act like you don't care. Right, and then you get the kiss, where he misconstrues. I love the line when he thinks it's Don, and he gets so intimidated. He says, "Oh, I don't even like to sit in Don's chair."
And misconstrue is being generous. I think that he like completely misreads the situation in every possible but so clearly in the friend zone. Yeah.
But she does confirm. He says, but you are spoken for. And as she's closing the door, right, she says, I am. And then you get the wettest place on earth in Betty's top drawer.
I guess I just struggle to at this point in the show really believe that she's that into Pete. Maybe it's because Pete is so pathetic and it's hard to wrap my head around it. But I don't know.
It is weird, right? It does. The show doesn't give you a lot of evidence for it.
They must have had a really fun night. I don't know. He must have been really good at. And what were you gonna say, Will?
Well, I had a question about the postcard, and I was wondering if I missed something when I was watching this. Where
so by wettest place on earth, it's a double entendre.
So when a daddy waterfall is a mommy waterfall.
Okay, thank you. When they go out to lunch, just before they post the postcard on the board, but then it's in the desk. And I was wondering how exactly did someone put it in her desk?
No, Peggy took it.
Okay, so it's implied that she took the postcard.
She swiped that noise because she was there when he put it up, and she was like, "That's mine. I want to smell."
Okay,
it.
so it's just implied that she took. I just didn't know if I missed something or if that was the implication I was supposed to.
I think so, and I think that bolsters Mike's argument that she's hung up on this guy.
Fair enough.
And at first I was also double checking that she also didn't get one herself, but it was the same one.
Yeah, that was because he wouldn't have sent just to her.
Well, you see
hers would
name,
say
right?
second wettest.
Well, don't you see the name that's addressed to in the same shot? So it's supposed to be the same card.
Yeah.
I just didn't know if it was given to her and it was just implied or if she took it. I just wasn't 100% sure if I missed something there.
I'll give her a phone call just to confirm. Yeah. Hey, Elizabeth, it's me again. Okay, so in this next scene, we meet Francine. That rhymes. And Francine, who is played by, oh gosh, I don't remember her name either. I need to write these things down clearly. But she's somebody we saw. She was in the show House. I don't know if either of you were ever into the show House, Hugh Laurie and all that.
And Dudek.
It was its heyday. But,
literally. And Dudek.
And Dudek, thank you.
Literally, I brought up House last time, but sure.
Let's calm down, Milaj. Right?
Yeah.
There's no need. We don't need to fight.
I used House as an analogy, but sure, go ahead.
And I'm just saying, House was in its heyday when this show was airing.
She was also in Bosch. If we want to bring up shows we mention every week,
sure.
There you go.
How do you feel about Bosch, John?
I mentioned last week. I've never seen Bosch. Okay, I've heard it's good.
About that.
Amazon Prime and all that.
Bosch. Well, you've seen Reacher, which is why I ask.
Yeah.
Bosch sort of started this whole. People act like Jack Ryan started this trend, but it was Bosch.
Jack Reacher. You're talking about the Jim Krasinski, not Jim Krasinski.
Yeah,
John
there's
Krasinski.
Jack Ryan, which people act as if that was the jumpstart, but it was Bosch.
It was Bosch. You're right. Yeah.
Aren't they all operatives of a federal agency though in those shows? Bosch
they're all
is
cops, defund. But
I'm
no,
talking,
I was gonna.
I'm talking about the trend where like an airplane novel character, like an Alex Cross type, gets turned into a series. And I'm surprised they actually haven't picked up the rights Alex Cross and turned him into the next Jack Ryan.
Well, they did with the other Alex Ryan, or Alex Ryan, Alex Ryder. That was it.
Sure, if you say so.
They did that with that guy too.
That was IMDb, though, right? I thought that was IMDb TV,
but through Amazon.
Mr. Mercedes.
Well, that first season is pretty good. But speaking of first seasons, you guys watch the show Mad Men? There's a character in it named Francine, and there's a fascinating conversation between her and Betty in this, which it again more and more set up for like, okay, Betty's depressed, and the show is just basically setting up like she has the home life, she has the Norman Rockwell painting sort of like situation, the kids and idyllic, all that good stuff. But then Francine kind of lays this like little barb, where she's like, oh, there's this divorcee who just moved in, and Betty's kind of like, what? And it's like a 9-year-old and a baby, and so we gotta put a pin on that because that's going to be pretty important later. And then we have our first egregious, by the way, it's the 60s moment where they're like, oh, the kids have been, the kids are being a little bit too quiet. And then Ernie comes out and he's like, we're playing Spaceman. And a nice little allusion, of course, to later in the episode when Don is sort of talking about like the spaceman and the cowboy thing and like kids being the future. And it's fine. It's fun. But we get Kiernan Shipka. She's here. And I think that was Kiernan Shipka in the pilot. Maybe not. There's a little bit of like a mystery around who that kid was in the first episode. I could have done more sleuthing, but I didn't. But this is our first like full on for sure. It's Kiernan Shipka. She's Sally Draper. Iconic role. I think, Will, you messaged me while you were watching this and you were just like, she's going to be a star.
Well, I was making fun of like the like man, big cigar, like that kid's going to be a star.
You don't understand, huh? You don't understand.
She's going to be in the pictures.
She's going to be in she's going to be in Sabrina, the teenage witch.
Yeah, she's going to be Sabrina. She's the reboot, credited. I tell you.
She's not credited in the first episode.
I don't know. Because I couldn't find who was. And it was one of those things where she was so young. Michael, I don't know what to tell you. I don't think it was her.
I'm looking.
All right. Well, while you do your little fact check, she comes out in the dryer bag, which, just seeing that. I remember the first time I saw that, it was like 2011. And I was just like, say what? She's like, she can't breathe. And it's just like, that's what the kids were doing. And, Betty's just sort of like, Sally Draper, come over here this minute. If my clothes are on the floor.
Yeah. I thought that was fun.
That was good.
Well, you don't mention it. There's two, this is the 60s moment in that scene alone.
I said
the
two.
First, but
that she's smoking while pregnant.
And she's smoking while pregnant. and that one.
Reveal. Great reveal. She gets up. She has Oh, Francine.
And that one plays just as like, okay, fuck, you got me. It's the 60s, right? Also, good cinematography.
Like you're trying to get out of it, Mike. Like, okay, fine. You're right.
Yeah. I thought the closing was very funny. Because it totally sets you up, right? You're expecting it. And then, the dry cleaning. I don't know. You can coach it. I thought it was fun.
Great acting from Kiernan Shipka. I know, Will, you're not the biggest fan of Kiernan Shipka. You said negative things about her in the past.
What?
Yeah, you said that Joey King should have played her.
I don't know what you guys are referring to. I think you're making light of me.
I do think Kiernan Shipka, we don't see her in enough things in general. I think
say Shipka one more time.
Shipka? Am I saying it wrong?
No, you just say it every time. Kiernan Shipka.
What's her name?
I don't know. You're making it sound like I'm saying it exasperated, like I can barely get through it. She's fantastic. Like,
remember the name. You remember that name, Shipka.
I gave up on Sabrina the Teenage Witch because I was like, this show is diluted. Like, I don't know what in the world is going on here. I gave up. But I don't think I've seen her in anything since, and that's a shame. I don't know who to blame.
She was supposed to be in a Quibi version of Swimming with Sharks.
Oh, Quibi? When's that coming out? Can I download it?
Right after the relaunch of MoviePass.
Just a quarter after
actually,
Never.
That's happening, Mike. So
I know, that's a joke.
But the joke is, I don't think we'll ever be downloading Quibi again, Mike. You're more optimistic than I.
Well, didn't all the Quibi stuff go to the Roku channel or something like that?
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah, so maybe it'll be on Roku one day, but That was the last thing I remember hearing that she was going to be in.
Her,
So
like Sophie Turner too. We haven't seen her. I mean, she had a baby, so we had to give her a little bird. But she
She's
got a
married
break.
to
The
Correct me
Jonas brother.
Correct me if I'm wrong as well. Yeah, it was Joe. It was Joe Jonas.
No, Nick
it's
is married to
I thought Joe was married to. Okay.
No, guys, I literally just got a cat on Tuesday and named him after Kevin Jonas. So let me tell you about the bros.
I'll defer
Keeping
to
up
you
with the
because
Jonas.
I haven't talked to Joe or Nick in quite a while. It's been a few weeks.
Yeah. What's the third one?
Nick?
Wait,
Or no, we
who?
said Nick.
Kevin, Nick, and Joe.
Nick, and Joe. We said all
There's
three.
also
of them.
Kevin,
there's also
Kevin's the oldest one, right? That was the
Yeah.
one that was okay.
Okay, well, you're gonna be very sorry, young man.
For
All right.
what?
I don't know. I'm just quoting the show. But yeah, so then Francine and Betty are sort of having their quibbles about, the house prices are going to go down because there's a divorcee on the street. And then right after this, Betty has her famous car accident scene. Terribly shot car accident. Because clearly there's so much damage on the car, but obviously she wasn't the way it's shot. It's there's no way she was going fast enough for the car to be in that much of a shape or whatever. But it's fine.
Well, two thoughts on this scene.
Okay.
One related to what you're talking about. I give him some slack because that's a pristine 50s car, 60s. Well, I guess the car would technically be 50s, right? Takes place in the 60s.
Probably. I mean, it's yeah.
So they were probably under strict regulations, you do not mess up this car. I know this is a car crash scene, but you're gonna make sure you don't.
It's very diplomatic, if you will. I appreciate that. Okay.
But also it's another Mike was talking about, another 60s thing where it's they're jumping up and down the streets because I guess seatbelts were invented until I don't know.
Yeah, I think you messaged me and you were just Don Draper needs to advertise seatbelts.
These dang seatbelts. That's what he needs to advertise because
that's what it was like back then, wasn't it? Kids were just kind of running around.
Well, it's true.
Crawling around the back seats. Yeah.
Yeah, but I thought that was kind of the point. That's why. What's the name of the son? I know Sally's the name of the dog. Bobby. He's literally jumping up front and back of the seat because it's this is a time before seatbelts. So you better believe this is the 60s, baby.
I've always wondered if they would ever get to why the naming conventions of those two kids, because Sally, okay, but why? Well, why Bobby?
Well, they all have to have Y, I guess, because Betty, Bobby, Sally,
Donnie,
sure, as he's known.
Yeah, that's what I call him. But no, so Betty sees Helen Bishop, the new neighbor. She's moving boxes and everything like that. And she has her panic. It's not a panic attack, I guess. It's just sort of her hands are going numb. And my read on this has always been that Betty has all of this anxiety. She has all of this depression and this emotion inside that she is not processing. I think that she hates being a housewife. Clearly, she hates her life. She's miserable, but she can't accept that she's miserable and unhappy because what the life she's living is exactly what she was told her whole life is what is the ideal. This is what she has always wanted. It's the sad end to a fairy tale. You got exactly what you were told that you should want, and it's not enough. And then she sees this woman who has no husband, has her two kids, and she has her own house, and she's doing her own thing, and she's making a go of it. And Betty is clearly unable to sort of cope with that idea. And so the only way for all of that anxiety to come out is physically, because that's how it works. It's if you can't process it emotionally, it's going to happen to you physically. That's how anxiety works. That's why it's a big deal. And I think the show gets that across pretty well without saying it straight up. So I give the show this episode major props on that account. I think that it's pretty well handled here. But I don't know, Mike, you're shaking your head. You're just being John, you're totally wrong. It's fine. You go for it.
No, John, I don't know why you got that read. I often do think you're wrong, but actually not in that moment.
Is this the exception?
This is the exception.
There's a blue moon outside.
Proves the rule. I also think it's good for 2007, right? I think mental health was still a big stigma even back then, especially talking about psychosomatic symptoms like numb hands, right?
Oh, what a term, psychosomatic. Thank you, Mike.
Yeah, I got a degree.
Yeah. So smart.
But yeah, no, I also think it just her so nonchalantly bringing up with multiple people about how she lost her mom. I'm lucky enough to
like nobody cares. She keeps bringing it up. She's like, my mom died, and people are just like,
yeah, honey, people die. Move on.
no,
but tried these lucky strikes.
Literally, the only person who says I'm sorry is somebody who's being like, you got to leave. It's like the mirror. Like, not even Mona will just be like, I'm sorry. She's literally saying to this psychiatrist, a trained professional, somebody who's supposed to be like, I'm, showing her empathy, showing her anything, and they just say nothing. It reminds me, that whole psychiatrist scene, it reminds me of like whenever I've come to Will and I've been like, Will, I've got all these problems, and he's just like writing his little notepad, and I'm like, I don't know what he's doing. I don't know what he's writing. I don't know. I feel like
towards you. Yeah.
I thought you were going to be like, actually, it's the other way around, John. Okay, so Don is sleeping with Midge again, and I mentioned earlier that I think that
he's wont to do.
I mean, he literally he's insatiable.
I mean, it's the second time this episode he's had sex with Midge. Yeah, because this is when. But yeah,
no, this is the first. This is the first time. Because the second time is coming up later, and I think the second time is more indicative than the first, because when this happens, it's right after Betty's got into her car accident, and like the kids are kind of just like, we're fine.
That's right, and it cuts to him, and you're like, this is what Don was doing
at that time. Yeah, and it's like they can't get a hold of him because he's out, and this is why he was out of the office, and like why Peggy was just like, Don's not here. Or I guess that's coming up later, actually. But no, this is interesting because you could at this point be like, why is Don doing this? Is he just doing it because he's horny? And I think the answer is no. I don't think this is a purely physical thing for him, because this episode gets across that like he has sex with Betty pretty regularly, right? Like, and he shows the signs of wanting it. So there has to be something else going on here. It's not purely physical. And this is the heart of why I think Mad Men is a great show. Because I think that, and when it comes to like why guys do terrible things, and guys, Mike, Will, our gender, we do some pretty bad stuff. We have some gamer moments between, yeah, you know what I'm talking about.
Say gamer moments.
Yeah. Have you ever heard of that, Will?
No.
Yeah, sometimes people have gamer moments. Like, Will, when you've ever played like a video game and then you have like an improper emotional response to the video game, you haven't been playing Elden Ring. That's what it is.
So when like you're playing Mario Party 2 and the other person hasn't played it,
yeah, in the years 2003, yeah.
Well, in the year 2022, and you're trying to explain it to them and they don't understand how it works, or
yeah, you get super mad at them and you're just like, I'm not friends with you anymore.
Nintendo 64, yeah. So that's a gamer moment.
All that to say, I think that men do terrible things for complex reasons. And I think sometimes it's oversimplified why men, like why traditionally, this is something I've always been curious about, because like we already talked about in this episode, I'll open up. Puerto Rican men. Let me tell you, like Latino culture, specifically Puerto Rican, like so many affairs in like my extended family. It's ridiculous. And I've always been curious about it. It's like, what drives men to do these things? So like to break their commitments, to like pursue these things. And a lot of the time, and rightfully, because I think it's the case plenty of times, men are just doing it because, like they want to get some action, and they are just very inconsiderate, and they will betray other people to get what they want because they're selfish. But I think that there are other things going on too, like deeper underlying emotional traumas that men have that like society just doesn't care about. Like men don't help each other at all. Like we're not emotionally supportive with each other. We don't talk to each other about stuff. And I love Mad Men because this was the first time I ever watched a show where, and I felt like, I know, say what you want about Matthew Weiner, I think the guy has some like very, very deep devils and demons and all of that. But I think that he's somebody who does understand that. He understands that like the things that make a Don Draper happen to a lot of us. And guys, we need each other. And so this is my pitch. I'm making a little bit of a pitch to Will. to Mike Overhauls. Like, guys, I need you. I need your help. That's all there is to it. Emotionally, psychosomatically.
I got a thing. I'm out of the
what?
office. I'm out of the office. Sorry. Yeah, go. I gotta go. Bye.
All right. Well, Mike is signing off. I don't know what that means.
I'm just kidding, buddy. I love you.
That's the beauty of Mad Men. It brings people together. It brings guys together, doesn't it?
It brings three guys together to do a podcast.
What's better than this?
Few things.
Just guys being dudes.
There you go.
So that was my little rant about toxic masculinity. What are you gonna do? This is a great scene too because Midge throws a TV outside the window, and Don being super possessive of her. Yeah,
I already said this to you, John, but I want just imagining them in the editing room adding some extra Foley to the scene, and just imagining like how fun that would be to be in the editing room. You can add like meow or like, hey, I'm walking here, or like any other any noises or phrases.
They have like stock stuff. Yeah. They just like downloaded it.
Yeah.
What would be the
had some guys?
Or like, wait, that's gonna leave a mark, or
yeah, that's a touchdown.
Or like my leg, or like any
the Wilhelm scream.
Yeah.
This is such a great scene too because like there are two things going on here. A, Don is being a dick, and there is a double meaning to that I won't get into right now. But he's being a jerk to Midge because he literally has a wife and he's giving her trouble because clearly like some guy gave her a TV and he can't stand it. But there's also something else going on here. I'm curious if you guys picked up on this too. Don sees her as a free spirit. Whenever he's having any sort of like creative crisis, he dives into sex with free-spirited, authentic people. That's my read of this. And it's something that I think is more complicated than I'm sort of maybe alluding to right now. But I do think that Don has this very clear modus where he's like, okay, my work is easier. Like I'm a better creative person when I sleep with these authentic, I'm saying that in quotes, like free-spirited New York artists, bohemian people, because it sparks creativity. What do you guys think of that read?
Well, I think that kind of gets into what I see as being one of the central conflicts of this first season, which is that Don Draper is like this old-fashioned man who's coming in conflict with the budding ideals of the 60s, which push back against the traditionalism of the 50s and kind of have a more rollicking free spirit.
Yeah, if he had his way, he wouldn't be married and have kids, right? He would just be in New York right now, not married to anybody and just sort of doing his own thing. But he does have that Norman Rockwell painting life because that is what he thinks he has to have in order to be the person he is right now.
Well, sure. I mean, he's like kind of like caught between two different worlds, but he is also a product of the 40s and 50s as well, as I'm sure the show will dive into later.
Sure.
But yeah, he is like kind of caught between these two ideals, but he grew up in a more traditional time span where he's, men were kind of put in the boxes and have this certain ideal. And then, she's obviously like a hippie and more of a free spirit. And she seems more in tune with her humanity and her emotions, things that Don has been, preconditioned to kind of lock up for a number of reasons. And, yeah.
I think I tied this read and this moment back to the very first scene where Don calls himself Moses. Because, very, very well-known story and idea, the life of Moses, right? Floated as a baby down a river and then just swept up into this life that wasn't his, right?
He's in the land. Yeah, this is all learned for him. This is not like organic to who he is. He's in a totally foreign location.
And so then he has the choice to profit off of this position he finds himself in this foreign land, or make a life for himself, right? And I think you're seeing in this scene the beginnings of Don regretting the life that he did choose.
Yeah. And I think the rest of the show is going to get so good at really stressing this point and making it even clearer. So, yeah, we are just like crawling through this episode. So I do apologize. I'm going to kind of speed it up here, right? Because again, I think this is going to get harder and harder because the show is so dense and so layered. I feel like we could spend hours and hours on it. We're not even halfway through this episode, which is something else. So I kind of want to just like speed run it a little bit. We kind of touched on a bunch of stuff that happens in the next couple scenes. Basically, Don is trying to sort of like reconcile with Betty's accident, the fact that he wasn't there. He obviously is like trying to overcompensate. He's trying to sort of tell her, he has like a little speech to her where he's like, well, like, why would you be unhappy? Why would you need therapy? Because that's what she tells him. She's like, I need therapy. The doctor said that this problem, I should probably go to a therapist. And he lashes out at her. He gets super upset with her. Like, he even tells her, like, don't do the dishes, do that for the girl. Like, clearly he's just like, he doesn't know where to like place his anger in this moment. He tries to make it up to her later. He tries to be like, we have such a great life. He tries to be just like, why would you be sad? Look at all the things that you have. And it's like, yeah, it's the 60s, right? It's like these typical attitudes of like not understanding what causes people to be unhappy and how materialism and on all of these things just have limits and they don't really make people happy.
But not only that, but I think he like takes Betty's mental health problems as like almost like a personal failure. Like it's a fault of his that she is ailing in some respect. Like it
makes him look bad.
It makes Don hates failure. I said it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, but it's like, but he just sees it as like a personal failure as opposed to Betty's problems. Like he takes it internally, and that's obviously, yeah.
He's like, oh, I'm not making you happy enough. He's making it all about him.
But look at the stigma. Even later when he's speaking with John Slattery's character, when he brings up again, like, oh, you said your daughter went to a psychiatrist, and very quickly he gets the blunt. You must be mistaken. Right? It's not just Don.
Yeah. And there's a whole thing, where Betty's even telling Don, is like, you should confide in Roger more. She's giving him advice on how to get closer to his boss, how to sort of like get Roger to be like more on his team, to like be better friends with him so that they can get to that 4 seasons life that they talk about. But it's so one-sided. She does so much for him. And to him, he's just like, he's just such a selfish human being. Like, he doesn't care about her happiness for the sake of her happiness. He cares about it in terms of like, well, you should be happy. He feels entitled to her happiness. It's such a very odd thing. We're kind of getting into like second wave feminism a little bit here in terms of like, how the show is sort of presenting certain characters. But I think it's really profound stuff because like, again, it's such a weird era of time when women were forced into these boxes, forced into these scenarios where it just looks like they have no like easy way out.
Yeah, and I think that also kind of gets, I'll dance around this rather gently. I feel like that kind of gets into the surprise and disappointment of Matthew Weiner's, like the allegations against him, like knowing that he's written such a sensitive episode. And then like you hear some of the allegations where he has like certain expectations of women staff members. And it's like, not that I think that anything he writes this episode is necessarily like artificial, but it just kind of paints the portrayal of like how complicated artists can be.
Yeah, you see a lot of that in like some of these other characters, right? That kind of the classic. I don't know. I guess you write about the things in some sorts of fashion. So, anyways.
Well, it's just that like comparing him to like someone like Aaron Sorkin, who like he can be a great writer, but it seems like he, even when he writes spoken women, he like those characters also like kept some of his own sort of like internalized masculinity is often even presented when he writes women characters. But like in this episode, you see such complex and nuanced portrayals of women in the workplace and all that stuff, and then you just hear about things in his own personal workspace, and it's just all the more disappointing for that reason.
He suffers from the things that he preaches about, and I think that that's a lesson to all of us, in my opinion, that you can talk a great game, and myself included, and obviously like we're full of failures, human beings, no matter the gender. Men in particular, we have a very specific set of problems. And I love pop culture like this because it gets us to grapple with some of this stuff a little bit. And it makes us, talk about this stuff in general in ways that like, to me, it's like very helpful. It's catharsis to go through this exercise of watching these shows and seeing yourself in it and seeing yourself and sort of like, you know what, I've been in that situation where I've been that person in the background while the guys were making the jokes and I didn't say anything, you know? And I love shows like this because it just exposes that. And that kind of, you know, funny enough, that leads into the next scene, which my favorite scene in the whole episode, probably, where if the first episode was all about Don being the guy trying to pitch the client, this scene is where Paul Kinsey and Sal, Ken, they're trying to pitch Don. So we get a little bit of like, what is life like at Sterling Cooper in between the big meetings when the copywriters and the art directors and those folks are trying to get the head of creative to buy into the idea, right? And they have an idea that they're going to make it all about, like the deodorant we were talking about earlier. They're going to make it space age. The fact that it's like a new technology, it's logical in a sense, right? The logic of like, well, let's sell deodorant like a space age thing. It's the 1960s, but they're trying to sell it to Don, who's just sort of like, well, who buys this? You know, not a person who just like sees deodorant as like a futuristic thing. It's like, that's why I'm going to buy that because it's futuristic. He's just sort of being like, no, women are going to buy this. He says like, let's bring it down to earth. And Paul gets like super deflated because he's the sci-fi Twilight Zone fan. You know, he just wants to make an ad with an astronaut in it, which is like super transparent. You know, this show does so many great ad pitches in general in terms of like the psychology of like how to get people to say yes to your pitch and how all that works. This is the first time I think that we really get a good overview of that life in the advertising world. So, you know, as somebody in that world myself, this is very true to life. But I love how it's not black and white because on the one hand, Don makes a lot of sense in this scene, and I want to get you to you know your read on it for sure, both of you. He's right that like trying to go the space route, it's like you're missing the demographic. You're missing like who's actually buying this. Why would people, you know, what would actually like get this thing sold? But at the same time, he's also super wrong because he's just sort of like, you know, what do women want? Maybe a cowboy. You know, like I had like Toy Story flashbacks where like Andy is like choosing between Woody and Buzz Lightyear and like just this sort of like, oh, women want a cowboy. They want a stoic sort of like, you know, the future scares people. And Don can't see that like, no, that's not the case at all. Like we already sort of like established earlier in the episode how like, you know, the future is something that excites certain people. So what were your all's reads on this? I'm going to start with you, Mike.
Yeah, this is my favorite scene in the whole episode too. I have a little bit different read on it. Because it doesn't, to me, I saw this as another scene where Don was being selfish. Where.
Oh, yeah, because he's putting his personal life into this.
Exactly. Instead of bringing, you know, his work home, he's bringing his home to work. And I think what's going on with Betty.
So obvious. Oh, my God.
It's bothering so. I mean, that's what do women want, right? That's what he's trying to figure out. He's so flabbergasted with Betty that he just goes and shits on these guys' work, which.
Exactly.
You know. Ends up, you know, working out them because you're right. He is right. It wasn't that great of an idea, right? It's a good first pitch, but there's something more to it.
Sure.
Don just keeps asking what women want. If only he were around in 2000 when Nancy Meyer made a film with Mel Gibson, and he would have all the answers that he's seeking.
All the answers, every single one. He would never have to wonder about the female gender again. Is that what you're saying? I just love it. He's just like, who's this moron? He pees in his pants. And I love it because it's like, we're not used to that. You know, like the three of us, we were born in the 90s, you know, like we have no context for what life was like before American astronauts landed on the moon. Right. So like, I love that Matthew Weiner brings that into this. That's sort of like stubborn, sort of old fashioned, like, don't you watch TV? On TV at this time, it's like Westerns, you know, it's cowboys. And like, that's what's influencing Don. You know what I mean? That at least for me, wants, I can't stop.
What a girl needs, whatever makes her happy.
There's a great scene after this where Paul walks Peggy through the sort of like how Sterling Cooper operates. I love this. It feels a little bit to me like Matthew Weiner is just kind of showing off, like, this is our set. Isn't this set really cool? It's a little sad because like so much of what we see in this whole montage, not a montage, but like a walkthrough, really, we don't really see the rest of like the series at all.
That's what I was wondering, because like Do you happen to know how long it was between production on the pilot and production on the second episode?
About a year.
Okay, so
no,
they had to.
No, about 6 months. About 6 months. Yeah,
They have to rebuild the set, or do they still have the set between?
they still have it.
Okay.
No, they did not. They shot the
filmed
pilot.
in LA.
No, the pilot is the only
Pilot's
episode
in New
they
York.
film in New York, and everything else is in LA. So they rebuilt it.
Okay, I was gonna say. I mean, they did a pretty good job rebuilding the set. I mean, between two episodes, make it seem fairly seamless.
No, I agree. And I guess I misunderstood the original question, but I love how Paul kind of just like he's taking Peggy through this, and they're trying to like sort of like repair sort of like the awkwardness of how she sort of blew him off the day before or whatever. But I love how this scene also gets across how the advertising client relationship works, where he even mentions like the creative is thrown in for free. The jingles, the Don Draper's job, it's basically worth nothing. Like what they're buying is media space at a huge markup. That's where the money comes in. And yeah, that's advertising. That's how it works. And I love it. I love how it's just sort of boiled down in that way, because it's so true to like, it's not glamorous. It's not this sort of like, well, I was gonna say HBO. I meant AMC. But obviously they're going for like an HBO sort of prestige kind of feel, AMC at the time and still today. I love it because it really is capturing, I think, or it's sort of like demystifying the advertising world in a really profound way, I thought.
Have you ever had like, what is the dumbest advertisement or ad that has worked on you? Do you like have a thought to that?
There's so many. I don't even know how to like narrow it down. I've literally just like I just didn't happen, but like I'm the kind of person like after watching Uncharted, because there's a whole scene in a Papa John's, and I'll just be like, man, what a terrible scene. I can't believe they filmed that it's Barcelona and they're in a Papa John's. I'd be like, this is terrible. As I'm walking to Papa John's, pick up some cheesy bread. Like, Papa John's, terrible. And I like buy some cheesy bread.
I mean, if this episode wasn't so long, I would continue talking about how bizarre that scene is, but that's not
Uncharted.
Mad Men. That
scene,
yeah.
I do love that they chose for Paul. I love Paul Kinsey's like, I'm gonna be Orson Welles for some reason. Like he would be a great Orson Welles in general, that actor, but he does like the pipe, he like tries to do, he mentioned the Twilight Zone, tries to do the Rod Sterling thing, he tries to be this mystifying sort of presence. This of course is like taking place 20 years after Citizen Kane comes out, but still.
Sure.
Also, I have bad news for him in regards to CBS pulling the plug on Twilight Zone.
That's right.
That's one of
Twilight Zone still had some time left after.
Yeah, but I feel like that was one of the jokes that was like, I generally think the cutesy stuff doesn't really bother me. That was the one where it's like, yeah, okay, we get it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Although I did appreciate, his whole thing where it's just like, yeah, there's this like whole advertising agency where all they do is smoke weed, and like they're probably the best in the business.
Smoke Mary Jane, you mean to say?
Well, it's 2022, Wash, and I don't have to say. I can say what I want.
Well, if you're gonna quote the line, I mean.
All right. We get the scene where Don and Roger talk about taking the Nixon campaign. I love Roger's answer to the question what women want, just because it's so true to his character, and it's the most honest answer I think any character would have given if they had been asked this question. What do women want? And Roger answers, who cares? And it's like, yeah, because he's honest. He literally, he's being himself, his terrible, horrific, monstrous self, and he's doing it in the most charming, affable way. And I think that sums up the episode. I think when it comes to misogyny, there can just sort of be this, I even said it earlier in the episode, sort of disarmingly, like boys will be boys. There's this attitude of like, when misogyny happens, people just being like, well, it's fine. Guys don't know any better. And this whole moment to me is Matthew Weiner saying like, guys do know better. Like they know like when they say things like, oh, who cares? They're just sort of being like, I don't care. And, I could understand, I could know that I don't care enough to find out. And at perfection.
Yeah. In a way, it's kind of like also in the same hand of like, this shit's been happening a long time. So like quit making the same excuses.
Agreed. And, Don starts drinking. because not even like an occasion, like us boys, because he's hanging out with Roger. He and Roger would make a great podcast, I think. Sterling Cooper, the podcast.
Be a lot of ice clinks and coughing from cigarettes.
Yep. Don comes home. The kids are watching People Are Funny, which Midge mentioned earlier. He goes to Betty and she offers him some cold lamb, which I literally wrote down as being like, who would be enticed by cold lamb? But I don't know if it's like you're gonna heat it up or anyway.
Well,
so he
was this predates the microwave, I have to assume.
Yeah, but they got ovens.
Sure, but I mean that's a lot of work.
You turn it on and you wait 10, 15 minutes.
I mean, I'm getting into Don Draper's mind here. That seems like a lot of work for a man who just came home from
Here's
work.
the problem. You can't get into Don Draper's mind, Lash, and that's the whole point of the episode.
I guess.
But
so.
no, Don gives Betty a watch. And
sorry.
You were to
The
say?
microwave was invented in 1946. Moving on.
Thank you, Michael. I appreciate your fact checking. It's just
Well, yeah, I didn't know that. Well, I guess you learn something every day.
I didn't think that the microwaves were like common at this time period.
Introduced to home use in 1955. You think Manhattan money isn't buying a microwave, John? You think you're special?
I was thinking about like in
radiation, though?
Don't they have like a whole thing in like American Hustle where it's just like the space oven and like they're like, what's up with these wacky microwaves?
I think first of all, everyone should calm down.
Sure.
Stop yelling at each other.
Sure.
I think it's coming. There are gadgets that come out and people are just like they're early adopters, But these folks, they live in Austining, right? They don't live in the Upper East Side. And that's all redundant. So Don gives Betty this watch and he's just like, when I said that you have everything, I was wrong. And he's trying to be an ad man. And I remember I was watching this and I was just like, Don, you scoundrel. You can't buy Betty's happiness. And that's what he's trying to do. And she literally just like, oh, that's so nice. That's so wonderful. That's so blah, blah, blah. Clearly she doesn't care. Later in the episode, she literally takes the watch off when she starts to talk like honestly with her psychiatrist. That's how much she cares. But she starts to unravel in front of Don. And I think she sort of hints at like what's bothering her, which she mentions through Sally, and she means herself. She's like, what if Sally had a scar? Then she'd be useless. She'd be, she'd go through life and life would be too hard. My read of this is that Betty is saying, if I was ugly, if I had gotten scarred in that accident, Don would just ditch me because what do I bring to this relationship? I don't know who he is. He hides everything from me. I'm only here because I am attractive to him. That's it. And she generates that through her daughter because she can't bring herself to say it about herself. And I think that it's so keen to like where her depression is coming from. What do you guys think?
Yeah, well, it's echoed twice in the episode itself, right? First with I can't think of her name, Sterling's wife. When she says, "Look at
exactly.
Look at you," right? You don't have a hard time keeping a man like that.
Exactly.
But then also Don in bed when he's trying to show her everything she has. What did he say? Mm-hmm. He says, "When I look at you, when I look at what we like, the kids, the house, it was nothing about her besides her look."
The last thing he says is that, "I look at that, and it's like her face."
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. You disagree, Will Ashton?
I do not disagree.
Sorry. I just wanted to bring you in, but not in a graceful way. But then it's so funny because when Betty breaks down and she's just like, what's happening to me? She starts to have like a minor panic attack. I shouldn't say minor. It's a panic attack, but it's one that's sort of like, she's trying to keep at bay, right? It cuts right to Midge. It cuts right to Dawn in her hallway, desperate. Clearly not the right time. They're not even in the apartment like they were before when it just cut to like them in the middle of having their coitus. No, it cuts right to like Dawn, like a drunkard at her door waiting for her, desperate. What do you guys think he's desperate for?
Strength, maybe, is how I read that.
Mike says strength.
I mean, his wife. How I read that scene is that Betty was at the doctor's while he was there. He dropped his wife off, who can't handle her shit, according to him, and goes to Midge.
I mean, I see it more, I guess, as escape, like Betty's failures personally. So the idea of Midge is like this sort of idea where he can like kind of live out a fantasy of not being himself being himself but not being himself at the same time.
So I think it's the opposite.
You think so?
I think it's the opposite. I think that Midge is when he's himself. I think the fantasy is Betty. I think the fantasy is what he's trying to sell to Betty. He's trying to sell to Betty happiness. Sure. When he's
I think he's
Midge,
always trying to sell
different,
happiness.
Isn't it? Well, with Midge, I think it's a little bit more free. It's a little bit more of like that is his real self. And what he gets with her fuels his creative spirit, and he's a taker. He's a user. He's just taking from this human, this Midge person, who is just sort of, she's having some fun in the midst of it, I guess. But Don's even trying to like bring some of his home life problems to her. And she's just like, can you not? Like, I feel cruel. Like if you're going to like break bring your sort of fantasy into this like real thing that you and I have. And it's not even a real thing that they have. I don't think it's a real connection. I think it's Don just trying to, again, I think this encapsulates Don's entire, like the answer to like who Don is and like what he gets from romantic relationships. He wants like a sort of creative muse. That's like his search. And he doesn't think that he can get it from one person. He has to get Betty, who is like a certain type of person that he gets something from. He gets the stability, he gets the traditional life that gives him an understanding of like American attitudes that help him understand, how do I create, advertisements. But then he gets from Midge the bohemian innovation that he brings that makes him feel value as a creative director at Sterling Cooper. It's fascinating. It's so well done. It's such good writing. Matthew Weiner is good at writing stuff.
He's looking for his Julia Fox, man.
There you go.
For his uncut ads.
we love Julia Fox over here. Even Will likes Julia Fox. And, Will's not easy to please. I'm just waiting for you to respond to that.
I'm trying to get this episode going. I apologize if I seem short. I just feel like we're almost 2 hours
10
into
minutes
this?
left.
Okay.
10 minutes left in the episode. We're at the part where Paul is he's making a move on Peggy. And it's my least favorite part of the episode because at this point, I feel like Paul and Peggy could be friends. Maybe they will be later. And I think that like Peggy at this point has found in Paul a friend, somebody who's showing her the ropes. And like, it doesn't have to be romantic. It's just, they have like a fun back and forth. Like it's not romantic at all. It's just sort of like a platonic, like, hey, my buddy. And he betrays that because he's horny and because he thinks that he sees an opportunity to, try to like make a move on her and have it reciprocated. Obviously, she rejects him. And we already talked about this earlier. And I think that is what makes Peggy the same kind of the mirror reflection of Don, which nobody seems to understand her. And she is confiding and keeping secrets from everybody of like what she really thinks. And like, there is one point where she does sort of like break down a little bit to Joan and just like, this is how I'm feeling. And Joan scorns her for it. She is punished for being forthcoming with Joan about her anxieties with this office workplace environment. And I think that is great because we don't need a flashback of what life was like for Don in 1957. We don't need it because we have this scene with Peggy. And I think this scene with Peggy tells you exactly what it was like for Don. Don was probably in the same boat as Peggy where he showed up and he was like being used and he was sort of just like the new guy and he was trying to like make a name for himself and people were just taking advantage of him. Not in the same way as like, I wouldn't assume people were trying to sleep with him like in the same way, but like general human nature. It's like when we see people, we try to like get something out of them. And I think that his early years at Sterling Cooper are mirrored through Peggy. And I love that because it's such a nice way to get around the flashback story, mechanism, but do it in such a productive and productive is not even the right word. Efficient. I don't know. There's a better word for it. It's just like really well written.
I mean, at least from the pilot, I got the implication that Don's upbringing was kind of not solely based on Peggy's character, but Peggy and Pete. Like it's a mix of the two. Like it's kind of like.
What do you mean
like,
by that?
Well, just that I feel like Don didn't really have the availability to be maybe as vulnerable as Peggy can often be. But I do agree that like Peggy's sense that like she's trying to find her place in this workplace where she kind of feels like she has to kind of assume different identities at different times does seem pretty true to what I imagine it was like for Don before he kind of got his sure footing and like he kind of figured out where he's supposed to be, and like the fact that he had to like kind of hold back his emotions to excel in the workplace. Like he had to learn the opposite lesson of what I imagine Peggy has to learn later down the line, where it's that like he has to kind of like reserve his like sense of like being understanding of being forthcoming, something that comes very naturally to Peggy in this episode, especially like in the bathroom scene where she's like the only one that really feels the desire to conceal the woman. I don't recognize that character. Is that supposed to be an extra? Is that a character that the woman that keeps crying in the bathroom?
Bridget?
Is that Bridget? Okay.
She's the main character. She's going to be like, she's basically Don Draper in the next episode. You didn't know that?
Okay. I did not. Yeah. I mean, like I said, it's been a while since I've seen these episodes.
Yeah,
but...
she's going to like she's going to like be in the next pitch meeting with Lucky Strike.
Okay. I don't know if you're joking
or
you're being
serious. He's fucking with you.
Okay.
But
I honestly do. I mean,
sorry.
Does that make sense, or is that my speaking out my ass here?
I think I'm more in line with that, Will. John, I think the hard thing I have with that comparison is that there's just no way that Don, a man in the 50s, had a similar experience to a woman in the workplace, right?
Yeah,
I see.
It's definitely not the same. Definitely not the same. I think that they're mirrors, though. They have similarities, but they're fundamentally different. But I do think that they do have some similarities. Like I think that's what the show's getting at. And you can obviously make an argument that like it's written in a way that's not authentic to the real life historical implications.
Yeah. But no, and to Will's point too, like look at Pete Campbell, 26 years old, sucks at his job. People don't even like him, but look how much success he has already.
You could call him a Roger Sterling, in the making, couldn't you?
No, I won't.
But like, hey, we'll have to build up to that, won't we?
I mean, but like even in the pilot, like looking at like Pete is pathetic in the pilot, but at the same time, like Peggy, even though she doesn't really like Pete, like she kind of idolizes or like looks up to him in some certain way. Like she literally sleeps with him because there's a sense of like she kind of wants to, like be respected or be like, kind of fill this like sort of role in the workplace. And it's just like, it's kind of what's tragic about her character in this first season from what I can recall. But I mean, it's just, like what Mike is saying, though, I feel like from what I gather, Don had to kind of learn the opposite lessons of Pete or from Peggy. I mean, in that like, like he probably had to like kind of hold back everything that like he wanted to do. And like, he's like a product of like the 50s, like in that like, he had to kind of like suck it up and be like a man's man. And like Peggy, it's like coming into her own, adulthood in the 60s where things were starting to get a little bit more liberated. Things were kind of becoming more, it's still like obviously the 60s. So it's regressive in a lot of ways, but, it's also becoming socially progressive in a lot of ways as well. And I'm assuming, based on what I assume the series is going to do, that, Peggy becomes a little bit, emboldened for that reason. But, that's me speculating.
Sure. The episode ends with a series of scenes that are very interesting. We, after we have the whole Peggy telling Joan, just like, I hate misogyny. It's so annoying. And the audience is like, yeah, you're right, Peggy. And then we cut to, it's interesting. We cut to Betty in the psychiatrist chair, which we've talked about in this episode already. And she's just unloading on this guy, but he's not giving her anything back. But we get clearly from this entire interaction that she just needs somebody to talk to. She needs to have a dialogue. She needs, any sort of interaction that makes her feel seen. And she's not getting that. She's not getting that from this guy. He's just sort of like sitting there, not responding to her. We cut then to, Don in a sort of like situation with Midge where he's like overslept or whatever, and he gets his pitch. Or not his pitch, but he gets his like ad creative where the solution to the deodorant ad conundrum is, what do women want? Any excuse to get closer. That's the ad. And it's such a juvenile sort of interpretation of that question, right? Or the answer to that question. But I love it because it's like that works as an ad. So you can't deny that like an advertisement getting to that point would sell deodorant. Sure. Like it would. But what would it do? Like nothing. Like it wouldn't actually mean anything. And I love it because it's like it's taking the creativity of Don Draper and setting it up as like it's genius, but also hollow and empty at the same time. And that's what I mean when I say this episode is such a great encapsulation of the entire series. Even though it's an episode that in some ways is kind of lesser than in terms of like some of its scenes are kind of so heavy-handed, particularly when we get to the next scene. We're coming up to the end here where I think we have Don and Betty. They're in a dinner out in the city, and it's perfect because what does she order to drink? A vodka gimlet. What does he order? An old fashioned. And it's set up earlier in the episode where, like, I mean, the name old fashioned of the drink, it's so on the nose, but what are you going to do? Betty clearly is trying to break away from Don's sort of like cowboy old fashioned aesthetic into the future, but he will not let her. He is refusing to. And the episode ends, and he's even being sort of like juvenile with her. He like makes a joke about like Pat McGroin and the phone book. And he thinks that he could fix everything with just being the same kind of person he was when they were in their 20s, when he was sort of wooing her and courting her. And she's going along with it because what else is she going to do, right? And the episode ends with Betty going through this entire experience where at the very end, she's like, I don't know this man that I'm with. I don't know my husband. But then all of these deep, intimate things that she has just told the psychiatrist, Don gets to call that guy up and get all those details for himself. While Betty knows nothing about him. Mm-hmm. And to me, that is such a better comprehensive essay on misogyny in general, no matter what the era it's in, whether it's the 60s or right now when we're talking about this, than that moment of like what he's doing to her. It's so much better than just sort of like a basic like workplace sexual harassment. Like, okay, yeah, look at that. It's the 60s. That to me, like this is where the show is like, this is where we're going. Like, get ready.
And then it was so highlighted and hit on. I loved the song as you're closing out of that. And you go into the closing credits. Like the first few lines of it, there's a monster growing in our heads, raised up on the wicked things we've said. And it's just like, that scene was perfect. And then that song was a cherry on top to talk about like the tone and where things are going.
I couldn't agree more.
No, I just want to ask.
Well, you're shaking your head. It looks like you disagree with both of us. Yeah.
Don't put words in my mouth or don't make listeners assume that I'm doing something I'm not doing, I guess.
We just want to know why you don't like the show Mad Men. That's all.
Well, now you're putting words in my mouth. But I was going to ask, so this is pre-HIPAA, right? Or is he
HIPAA,
just...
the Hippocratic Oath? Or
what's he
like disclosures?
Well, yeah, I just mean that I just didn't know if he's like, this was before psychiatrists were, like the if they before like they were like legally not allowed to disclose stuff.
Wasn't enacted until 1996.
Yeah, it was later in the game.
Okay, I just didn't know like he was being an extra bad therapist or if this was just like way before.
I think this was like the common attitudes of the day.
Okay,
and
that's what I figured.
Yeah,
I just want to make sure.
I was wondering to myself, I was like, was this something that Don thought to himself that he needed to, and that's my read of it, is that he probably, his understanding was like, I'm going to find out who the therapist was going on. But you could also read it as like Don just sort of like being told like, oh, by the way, by the psychiatrist, if you want to know what's going on, give me a call.
I mean, literally happening behind closed doors, like that.
Exactly. Yeah. chef's kiss. And that's how the episode ends. And that's how we dive into what I think is going to be the real thrust, the storytelling engine of season 1 of Mad Men. Are you guys ready? We're getting into it. I know we went super long on this. I do apologize. This is a bit of an aberration. It should not be this weighted, but I think this was necessary.
I think we literally went an hour over the episode length, but that's fine.
We did, but we got it out of our systems. I think.
Sure, I guess.
Hey man, you can't mess with perfection. That's what I gotta say.
All right, well, we're gonna bow out for now. Thank you for listening to our little bit of a Mad Men diatribe. Mostly it was me ranting about men, which I am wont to do. I do that a lot. But
you are a bit mad, I guess.
That's true. We'll be back soon with episode 3, which is called Marriage of Figaro, which I already mentioned earlier in the show. It's my favorite episode of season 1. There's a lot more good stuff to come. But until then, you can, of course, subscribe to us on the usual channels. And I have nothing to plug. I think we should just say goodbye for now. But thank you for listening. This was really fun, guys.
Thanks. Bye. Follow me at Jon Negroni.
All right. Bye, everybody.